especially talking to a Maine audience, I could pretty much know that every single one of you has a place you like to go or have had an experience outdoors where you really connected very deeply and personally with the earth. I can't imagine. Anybody not have that experience in this room? Yeah, probably everyone. And certainly I have. And for me, I love to go camping in the North Woods of Maine. One of the things that awes me the most is a really dark night where there's no moon and you can see the Milky Way. It's like this glittering path across the sky. When I see that, I get chills. It's like this is showing me that I'm just a little speck here on the earth and there's this vast universe out there. So these are the stories that connect us to the earth. And sometimes these stories are negative ones. And in my book, I tell one about my childhood where one of my favorite places to play became so polluted I couldn't play there anymore. It was a stream. And the stream was clear and had little fish in it at one time. And then one day, I went out there with my best friend, and the stream had turned orange. You couldn't see the bottom of it. It was only a foot deep. You couldn't see the bottom of it, and it was ruined. And that just really, it moved me because I went home and I told my mom and dad about this, and they didn't do anything. And I, as a child, I was probably 10. What do you mean? You're not going to do anything about this? You know, and that really tipped me off that we allow a lot of things to happen to this earth without taking action, without doing things about it. And I think, for me, probably that was the genesis of my environmental advocacy. So our Earth stories, our Earth connection stories, they connect us to our spirit, to our essential selves, to who we really are. But they're also very useful in advocacy work. And they're useful for two reasons. One is that, of course, they keep us grounded. So if you're doing advocacy work, it can be tough going sometimes, and you need to be grounded in order to continue it, in order to remember why you're doing this work. But they can also be very useful if you're testifying, if you're working on an issue, because what citizen advocacy is telling decision makers why you care about an issue. It's your personal reason. Why do you care about environmental rights? Why do you care about environmental education? This is really important for decision makers to hear. If they don't hear why these issues matter to you, they're not going to move on these issues. And in fact, decision makers, we kind of wish that they would step out and do the right thing. But honestly, unless they know there's support behind them, they really can't do that, and they really won't do that. So they kind of need to know what you think about this issue. That's how important it is. So these Earth stories, their power is to ground you, motivate you, and to be used in advocacy work. So sometimes your Earth story might be directly related to a policy issue. And one of the great examples of this in Maine is Fred Stone. Anybody know Fred Stone's story? You heard this story? Yeah, a couple of hands, yeah. So Fred Stone is a farmer in York County, and a third-generation farm, a carefully bred dairy herd over generations. He had been spreading sewage sludge on his fields as fertilizer for many years. Come to find out, that fertilizer had toxic chemicals in it, a group of chemicals called PFAS, which I'm sure you've heard of. And so this was devastating. Fred lost his business. His well water was contaminated. And even his blood and the blood of family members had toxic levels of PFAS in it, still do. But what Fred did was very, very courageous. He went before the Environmental and Natural Resources Committee of our state legislature and told his story. He went in, he told his story, and actually what happened was, and he didn't know this, but he started a movement. Because Maine is now in the lead on PFAS regulation. We're trying to clean it up. We're testing farms all over the state to find where these chemicals are. And we're doing everything we can to try to clean up this mess. We're the #1 state in that, and it all started with Fred being courageous and stepping forward and telling his personal story. So that's how powerful personal Earth stories can be. And so now there's, I think, 15 states that are working to regulate PFAS, and the EPA is also discussing what they might do about it. So it all started here, and it all started with Fred. Yeah, yeah. I mean, we should give a shout out to him. Yeah. So citizen voices are extremely important, and I just can't emphasize this point enough. So what's going on today, and you probably know this, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that there are anti-environmental groups out there actively introducing legislation in all 50 states and in Congress. So just for example, there's the what's called ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council. There's the Heritage Foundation. There are a lot of groups that are anti-environment. So what's going on is they're introducing it's called model legislation that states can then use. And what they've done is in 11 states, they have squashed incentives for electric vehicles. In 11 states, they've squashed that. On the national level, they've introduced legislation to penalize any financial institution, banks and other lenders, who divest from fossil fuels. Yeah. And what that means is basically they're trying to pass a law that says if you divest from fossil fuels, then you cannot handle any public funds. Well, universities, state governments, all kinds of public institutions hold their money in banks. So that's a huge slice of the market that basically, if this law were to pass, those banks wouldn't be able to service them. So they're introducing this legislation now. This is one of their current introductions. They've also introduced legislation to make it so that Congress cannot enforce the Clean Air and Clean Water Act. So this is pretty bad stuff that's going on. And here's the problem. If we don't have citizens speaking up, the balance of power is completely off. It's completely skewed towards these anti-environmental groups. So we've got to have all of us speaking up for what we care about. Because the majority of Americans do care about the environment, but we're just not speaking up enough about it. So that's what we're up against. That's why it's so important for citizens to speak up. If we don't speak up, then our decision makers won't really know how we're affected by public policies. In fact, a great example of that is the fracking industry in Pennsylvania. So what happened there is the Pennsylvania legislature passed a bill that would allow fracking to be done anywhere. Basically, it overrode any local zoning. So it meant that fracking could be done in schoolyards, town parks, neighborhoods, and so on. And the way that got passed was that the oil and gas lobby said, well, fracking, the wells are deep underground. They won't really affect people at all. You won't even know that they're there. Well, it wasn't until citizens came forward in Pennsylvania and said, well, actually, our well is contaminated, our livestock are dying, and basically what you heard from the oil and gas industry is wrong. And ultimately, those laws were overturned because citizens came out and told their story. So it's really important that citizens speak up because otherwise, we could be in a situation like they were in Pennsylvania. So in Maine, we're all really lucky to be in Maine. My goodness, we have, I think, the second largest legislature in the country. That means there's less people per legislator of anywhere. And so a question I like to ask people is, how many phone calls do you think it takes to move a legislator in Maine? Anyone want to guess how many? 5. You're right, it's 5. It's awesome, just 5. So that tells us how few people are actually speaking up, and that if you do, it can really make a difference, because it is 5. I've heard this confirmed by a number of legislators that I know. So I'm going to go back now and do a little bit of environmental history. And I'm going to take us back in time to the year 1969. And 1969 was when the television news was kind of the big thing. Families, would sit around in their living rooms and watch the evening news on television. And there were 3 big events that happened in 1969. One of them was the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. Well, people are nodding, you know this, right? So, and I was there too. I bet some of us were actually seeing this on TV. And so the Cuyahoga is a river right by Cleveland, Ohio. It had caught on fire quite a few times before, but what was different in 1969 is it was caught on the evening news. There was live footage of the flames. I actually remember this, flames kind of leaping up into the sky, and people were pretty horrified with that image. And another event that happened right at the same time was an oil spill in Santa Barbara, California. And anybody remember that one? Yep, yep. So 36-mile-long oil slick. It was horrifying. There were pictures of that on the television news. We could see the oil slick grow every single night. They showed pictures. It was getting bigger and bigger. So that was happening then. And then the third thing was smog over the city of Los Angeles. And the TV cameras caught that, and it was sort of this yellowy brown cloud, and you couldn't see any of the mountains surrounding that city because of this smog. So all three of these things were very visual images that were seen nationally by many, many people. And so what resulted from that? Does anybody want to say? Earth Day, right. So April 20th, 1970, immediately after these 1969 events, the very first Earth Day took place. And the thing to know about this Earth Day was that 20 million Americans showed up across the country. 20 million Americans. That represented 10% of the population of this country at the time, which was 210 million. So it was an enormous success. And that was in 1970, and then as a result of that, between 1970 and 1980, 28 major laws were passed, environmental laws. These are the fundamental basis of all our environmental laws now. So you remember almost all of these: the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the EPA, the Superfund, the Toxic Substances Control Act. I mean, all the big environmental laws that we have now passed in the 10 years between 1970 and 1980. Really interesting. Endangered Species Act, thank you. Yeah, any other ones you can think of? Yeah. Yeah. So one of the reasons I bring this up, of course I'm bringing it up because we're at Earth Day right now, or it was yesterday, but the other reason I bring it up is because I think the question we're faced with right now is, can we create the critical mass like we had in 1970 and move the ball forward on the environment? Can we do that? Can we create that critical? We had critical mass with 10% of the US population showing up for that event. Well, let me give you this fact. So in 2019, we had the climate strikes. Anybody attend the climate strikes here? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was the largest sort of public environmental event recently, because COVID kind of shut us down for a couple years. But anyway, anyone know how many people in the US showed up for the climate strikes? The answer is 4 million, actually. But it's not 20 million. It's 4 million, right? And the population of the country has grown, so relatively speaking, what we got in 2019 at the climate strikes was, it was 1.8% of the population of this country. So we didn't quite make the critical mass hurdle there. So that is the question. Can we do that again? And I actually think the answer is yes, and I'm going to tell you why. So one of my favorite quotes is from a fellow named Eric Liu. And Eric Liu was an advisor to President Obama. He's an author, and he works a lot on democracy issues now. And what he said was, power is infinite. Power is infinite. And I love this because, of course, advocacy is all about power. We're going to talk about power now a little bit. And so what did Eric mean when he said power is infinite? Well, what he meant was that you can create power by organizing. You could basically create power where none existed before by organizing. And there are examples throughout history, amazing examples of where this has been done. One of my favorite ones is the tomato pickers in Florida, because they were the most disempowered people you can imagine. They were Mexican immigrants. They did not speak English for the most part. They had, they lived in shacks on the side of the field. There was no plumbing for them. They're way underpaid, and they really were not getting a good deal. And they decided to go on strike. And they went on strike against Campbell's Soup, and they had lots of support from many other organizations. A lot of faith-based organizations came out and supported them. And they went on strike, they boycotted, they organized a boycott of Campbell's products, and they won it all. And it only took them about 4 years. They now have full benefits, they make a good wage, they have good housing, they have restrooms on the site, everything they asked for they got. And that's because they created power through organizing. I think that probably the company thought, we can get away with this, they'll never do anything. Well, they did something. And there are lots of great examples here in Maine, too. In fact, one of the really good ones right now is the Climate Education Bill. LD 1902, I think it is. Yeah, yay. Our youth organized and passed that. Yay. Yay. And not only they passed it, they got $2 million to fund it. Yeah. Woohoo! And that's because of organizing. If they would not have had the power, except they came together and organized and said, look, we're not getting any kind of education in our schools about the climate, and yet this is our future. That argument, that passion, that personal connection to the issue prevailed, and they won the issue. So that's how important the power of organizing is. So in advocacy, there's sort of two ways of using power. One is your personal power through your own Earth connection stories. And one of the things that I found in my career was that I always, in fact, I was asked this question last week in another talk, like how do you keep such a balanced approach when there's so much mudslinging and that sort of thing going around? And I said, well, the way I do that and the way that I think works is by I stay authentic. I stay within my own power. I stay authentic. I don't try to put anything over on anybody. I remember my Earth connection stories, and I come from that place. And I think that kind of personal power really, really works. By being your true self, by remembering why you're actually out there doing this, that has power. And then the other way that power is used in advocacy is through organizing. Really, really important. You can create power by organizing. So, one other thing I want to mention is, and this has sort of come to me recently, is that all of advocacy is really about addressing fear. I just never really thought of it quite that way until recently. But basically what happened was I was sitting in the balcony in the State House 2 weeks ago listening to the floor speeches for the Pine Tree Amendment. And unfortunately, what I heard, and I had a little notebook in my pocket, and I got it out and started writing it down. I heard all kinds of fears. I have a water well, and this is going to make it so I can't use my well. I burn wood in my wood stove, and this amendment's going to make it so I can't burn wood anymore. This is going to create a whirlwind of litigation. Just a long, long list of fears. And what I realized at that moment was we'd worked really hard on this bill, and we got really far with it, but we hadn't fully addressed all the fears yet. And that's the work that's in front of us now. We have to do that. And that's what advocates do. They listen for fears and concerns. They listen with compassion and with patience, and it takes a lot of patience, especially when you hear fears that are absolutely outlandish. The environmental rights is going to do something to your water well. That's way out there, right? But you have to really listen to people and know that that matters to them, and then figure out, well, what can I do to address that issue? What can I do to help this person see it a little differently? So that's really the work of an advocate, is to listen for the fears and then to, as compassionately as you can, to try to address those things. So one of the things I like to talk about is how advocacy is for everyone. And this came up this morning in the youth panel really well, I thought, because basically with climate change and with toxic pollution, we're in an all-hands-on-deck situation. There's no question about it. This is really, really serious, and it's going to take all of us to turn this around and to create the kind of world we want to live in. We're talking about major transformation here. There's been some discussion here, too, about a different kind of economy, and absolutely, we have to go to a place where we have a caring economy, not a maximizing profit, the means justify the ends type of economy. So we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to take all of us working together to do it. But what I like to say is that there is a role for everyone. There are as many ways to advocate as there are people. So some of us like to go to Augusta, we like to talk to decision makers, and we like to do that kind of thing, but that's not for everyone, and I know that. But I think everyone can be an advocate in their daily life in whatever it is they do. So by that I mean, if you are a landscaper, you can advise your clients to not use toxics on their lawns. If you are into cooking or perhaps even in the restaurant business, you can use locally sourced ingredients and you can explain to your customers why that's important. You can be an artist, you can be a photographer, you can be a poet. There's so many ways to be an advocate for the earth, but we all have to do it. We all have to find our way to do that. So that's what I say is we need everybody, and we need everybody to figure out what their pathway is. And of course, the more people that work on policy issues, the better, but I also think that there's a place for everyone if that's not your thing. So the final thing I want to talk about is the opportunities we have right now, because one of the things, I mean, we're in a very chaotic kind of time, we all know that, but it represents a huge opportunity. So just going back to the 60s for an example. So back when all those environmental laws were passed, back when the Cuyahoga River was burning, lots of other things were going on too. There was the Vietnam War, there was the women's movement, there was violence in the South, particularly on civil rights. It was a very tumultuous time then. And what happened? Well, what happened was we passed the Civil Rights Act. We passed 28 environmental laws. We got a lot of things accomplished for women, particularly in the workplace. Now, I'm not saying our work is done by any means, but what I am saying is that when you have a time that's really chaotic and tumultuous like we have now, that's the opportunity when real change can happen. We've got a lot coming at us right now. We've got authoritarianism trying to take over democracy. I mean, this is huge. But it gives us a chance to say, well, what do we really want? And what are we willing to work for? And what kind of future are we going to create together? That's the chance we have in front of us right now. So it's actually a very exciting time to be alive, because if everybody was satisfied with where things were, nothing would change, right? But the fact is there's a lot of troubling things going on, and that's our opportunity to move into a different kind of way of being. And for me, and in my book, I actually have a vision in there, but it's a time where I want to see us go. It's a time where we're treating people and treating the earth in a totally different way. We're going to treat each other and the earth in a way that where we really care. It's based on love. It's about how we can respect and nurture each other and the planet that we're living on. So that's where we can go. I see the possibility. It's going to take all of us to get there. So that's kind of what I want to leave you with. I do have my book if you'd like to buy one, and it comes in lots of different versions like ebook and audiobook and all that too. And I am happy to answer questions as well, but I really hope I have encouraged you a little bit to try to do what you can to advocate for the environment. So thank you.